wait and give the people here in the audience about 3 more minutes in order to show up here. Just give them a little time. So hang in there. Thank you. Hi, good evening, Oxnard residents. I'm Joseph Marcinko. I'm the Assistant Public Works Director. I oversee water utilities, and I'm your host for this evening's meeting. Here to join me are Michael Wolf, our Public Works Director, and we have Abe Maldonado. He's our Water Resources Manager. Chris Payton, he's our Water Operations Manager. We have our staff in the back here. We've got Laura Camacho and Ashley Coronado, as well as Jasmine Charlesworth up front. We're also joined by our rate consultants from Raftellus. We have Steve Gagnon and Gina DePinto. So here's the schedule for this evening's community meeting. We're going to begin by showing you a video and about the water system. That will be followed by a presentation on the water system that I'll be giving. After that, it will be followed up by Steve with a Rates 101 on rates and the cost of water study. And then after that, we'll open it up for questions from the community. So with that, I'd like to be able to start the video.
Oxnard water, clean, safe, reliable. It's so essential to life, we barely give it a second thought. We just turn on the faucet and there it is. Do you ever wonder where all that water comes from?
Some of our imported surface water comes from snowmelt in Northern California's Sierra Nevada mountains. It travels over 500 miles through the State Water Project's massive system of engineered reservoirs, pipes, pumps, and other infrastructure. This precious water supply is shared by millions of people in California. The amount we get is limited and also very expensive. Our other sources of water come from local groundwater supplies pumped out of the naturally occurring aquifers in Oxnard and surrounding areas. This groundwater is locally managed, so it's easier to access and less costly than imported water. The imported water source is blended with local groundwater supplies to ensure a safe and reliable water supply.
Our highly trained and certified staff are responsible for pumping groundwater, regulating flows, and treating and blending water supplies. Here in Oxnard, some of the groundwater we pump out of the local aquifer is very high in minerals and salts. After the groundwater is pumped out of the wells, it's pre-treated and sent to the groundwater desalter. The desalter uses reverse osmosis to produce ultra-pure water, which is then blended with other city water sources. After additional treatment and disinfection, the blended water goes through extensive sampling and testing.
Our team ensures that Oxnard's water quality meets or exceeds all federal, state, and local drinking water regulations. We conduct more than 3,700 water sample tests each year for about 300 different constituents and are required to report this information to the State Water Board's Division of Drinking Water.
Our team is responsible for delivering high-quality drinking water from our treatment facilities to you through an extensive distribution system. We provide 24/7 emergency response for customer emergency shutoffs, leaks, water main breaks, and other emergencies. We also install, maintain, and replace water mains, valves, pumps, and other essential equipment. Maintenance is really important because it helps keep our equipment and infrastructure working well and for longer.
As a city that is nearly 120 years old and home to more than 200,000 people, Oxnard must continue to replace aged-out infrastructure in order to maintain safe, uninterrupted water delivery service. Through the city's 5-year capital improvement program, also known as the CIP, Oxnard has identified more than $141 million worth of water infrastructure improvement projects, which are needed to continue delivering high-quality water to our community. Some CIP projects include recently completing a $4.1 million project that replaced corroded cast iron pipes in La Colonia with new PVC piping, investing $13.3 million to replace water distribution mains at various locations across the Hobson and Kamala neighborhoods, areas where the water pipes are more than 60 years old, investing nearly $30 million to replace all Oxnard water customers' meters throughout the city. These meters have exceeded their working lifespan, and the city will be replacing each one over the next 3 years. The new advanced water meter system will allow customers to monitor their water usage in real time and will provide leak detection notifications to help prevent higher bills. The CIP provides a roadmap for how the city will build water resiliency during the drought in order to help maintain a safe and secure water supply. Securing a reliable water supply requires both short and long-term project planning for drought resiliency. It also requires a financially secure operating budget in order to meet these challenges.
So now we'll transition to our presentation for the water system. While I'm waiting for that, just say that you get to see a lot of images from the field, which is something that you don't get to see. We do a lot of work out in the field. So this is a presentation for a little bit of background information regarding the water system and things associated with it. So Oxnard Water Division provides service 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We serve 25 million gallons of water a day to 200,000 customers and hundreds of schools, parks, hospitals, and businesses. Some of the key areas of the Water Division are the Water Resources section, where we have water sources, water conservation, and regulatory and water quality. We have water operations, which is production, treatment, delivery, which is the same as distribution, and metering. And we also have the Advanced Water Purification Facility, the AWPF. You'll see that acronym a lot. And there we talk about treatment, delivery, and metering. So to start off, we have our water resources. Oxnard's water consists of three main water supplies. First one is Causation Municipal Water, which you can see from the graph up there that comes in from Northern California. That comprises about 30 to 40% of our water supply. The next is our own groundwater allocation, where we have about 20 to 30% of that water is used for our water supply for a year. And the last is United Water Conservation District, where we purchase local groundwater. And that also makes up about 30 to 40% of our supply. So some of the key water resources areas are our annual water quality reports. We do a lot of reporting. Triannual public health goal reports, annual state reports, water allocation tracking, groundwater reporting, water supply and demand. We have to keep a close track on our water that we have rights to, as well as what we use. Drought response and management, water shortage contingency plans, and water loss audits. Water loss audits are a very important part of what we do because it tracks the difference in between how much water we produce and how much water gets metered out into the public. So that water is a key resource for us. It's a very important part of what we do. It comprises about 30 to 40 or 40% of our revenue, but so making sure that we conserve it is very important. Some of the key conservation areas are efficient water use, conserve resources, prevent pollution, energy savings, education and outreach, water savings, and legislative reductions. So conservation requirements are frequently changing. I'm sure you've all known in the last year that we've had drought restrictions in place. We're down to 1 day per week watering from MWD and Causation Municipal Water District restrictions. We have limits on 10 minutes per station for your controllers, as well as no watering of non-functional turf. All of our staff ensure that Oxnard meets its conservation requirements. So they're very, very strict on that, and they're very high penalties and fines that you have to pay if you don't. So switching over into water operations, some of the key areas of water operations that we have 10 groundwater wells, 5 interconnects to United Water Conservation District, 1 interconnect to Causation Municipal Water District. We have a desalter facility, 6 blending stations, and we manage over 500 miles of distribution pipeline and somewhere between 43,000 meters in connections. We also have an advanced water purification facility that this place is way in advance that other water utilities wish they had. So water operations covers the majority of production, treatment, delivery, distribution, metered operations, maintenance, and emergency repairs. So a little bit more on that is that we add some chemicals for disinfection. You need to make sure that the water is disinfected so that it doesn't have any microbiological activity, because that's an acute and it could make you ill if you have that in it. We have a desalter because the local groundwater is high in salts, as you may know. So we reduce the salts and to make sure that we keep the salinity down in the water. There are regulations on that. Oops, sorry. So we also have to maintain water pressure and flow for firefighting. And backflow is another one that's very important so that we don't get any contamination back into the water system. So one of the things that's changing with water constantly are new water regulations. There are new contaminants that are coming out all the time. You've probably heard of the perfluorinated acronyms, PFOS and PFAS, and they're regulated down into the part per trillion levels, and they keep coming out, and we must meet all the regulatory requirements, state, federal, state being State Water Resources Control Board, Drinking Water, federal being Environmental Protection Agency. We also have to deal with water quality. We have to collect samples weekly. We collect samples for over 300 tests and about 3,700 samples a year we collect to make sure that we're testing the water for all the different requirements. We also have a backflow protection program that, as I mentioned earlier, it prevents water that's contaminated from pressurized sources from backflowing into the water distribution system. So we have about 11,000 of those backflow devices that we have to make sure they're tested every year, and that provides protection for the integrity of the water system. So the last part of this really deals with our advanced water purification facility. This is something that's near and dear to my heart. I'm very excited that Oxnard has such a facility. And some of the key points here is that we want to develop this as an additional sustainable water source. It's a multi-stage advanced treatment process to create ultra-pure recycled water. Currently, we produce about 1 million to 1.5 million gallons per day. We have the capacity to be able to run it at 6.2 million gallons per day. And it has future expansion plans to go to 12.5 million gallons a day. Currently, it's being used for agriculture irrigation. Future use is going to be for indirect potable reuse. So we're going to be able to take that ultra-pure water and be able to augment it into our potable water supply. When we do that, then this will provide drought resilience for the area, which we could really use now as you are all conserving water and looking at our water resources availability into the future. So we'll use aquifer storage and recovery. So we'll take that ultra-pure water, we'll inject it into the ground, we'll follow the existing regulations that are set up for that, and then we'll be able to take it out. And once we have that tested and made sure that the water quality is fine going in and coming out, then we'll be able to get permitted to be able to use that to augment our water supply. So this is just a slide that goes over the kind of water circle where, you know, people consume water, goes down, it gets recycled, and we put it back into the ground and pull it back out and make sure that it's safe to drink and provide it back to the customer again. So this make it a sustainable water resource for this area and for the city. But we have a lot of utility challenges, and this is something I'd like to make sure that we keep everybody informed about. So with all of the water supplies, because of the drought, they're all taxed. So the groundwater in the local area is depleted from overpumping and lack of recharge. We have the increased costs of water, so all of the purchased water costs are going up. We have, as you've seen in the video, we have to replace our old aging infrastructure. And due to things like COVID and supply chain issues, we have increased supplies and material costs that keep going up. We also have regulatory compliance and mandates that we have to keep up with, and we don't have a choice in meeting these things. And lastly, we have to recruit state certified staff. We just can't have someone come in and work on the water system. So with that, I'll turn this over to Steve and for his portion of the presentation, and then we'll take questions directly after. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Can we put up my presentation? Thank you. Good evening. evening, everyone. We have a short presentation about Rate Setting 101, and this is the agenda. We have a brief background. We'll go through Rate Setting 101, which will include financial planning, a water cost of service, and water rate design before we wrap up. Just a brief introduction. The Raftellus teams includes myself and Gina DePinto. I've been helping cities, water districts, and wastewater districts set rates in Southern California for about 14 years, and I've been engaged by the city to help them set rates. And then my outreach lead is Gina DePinto. And let's define what a rate study is. A rate study is a financial planning process to set rates that considers fairness and equity, community values. These are things such as what's important to you, such as conservation or affordability or simplicity. We want to make sure that we set rates that promotes a financially viable utility. Therefore, it has to cover your operation and maintenance costs, your infrastructure costs, and of course, we want your rates to be legally defensible. So why are we here tonight? Why would the city do a water rate study? I'd say the most important reason is the item in bold. Rates must keep up with costs to operate the city's water system. Otherwise, you don't have a financially viable utility. Some people may not know that the city's water division, which is also called an enterprise fund, is not like other government services such as police, fire, libraries, and parks. These services are funded by tax dollars from the general fund. The water enterprise is funded by water customer rate revenue. It's essentially a not-for-profit business. There's no shareholders to enrich, there's no bonuses to pay. Your costs, your rates need to cover your costs, and that's by law. Proposition 218 states that rates must be based on the cost to serve water. This graph is just a little more background. It shows two sets of lines. The bottom line is the consumer price index, which is in the news a lot these days. Everybody knows that inflation is much higher than it has been in the past. So the bottom gray line shows the CPI, the gray line. That's all items. It's your normal day-to-day goods. But the federal government also tracks just utility rates, and that's the top line, the blue line. That's water and sewer rates. Trash is included in there too. But you'll notice an interesting phenomenon is that water and sewer costs are going up much faster than your everyday goods in the gray line. And the reason behind that is something that Joe's video and Joe talked about is the capital intensity of the system. Most of our water and wastewater infrastructure in the United States, a lot of it was built in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, which means it's 50, 70, 80, depending on the city that you're in. It's getting really old, and it's corroding, and it needs to be replaced, and that's very costly. And so that's why the blue line is outpacing your everyday goods shown in the gray line. So what do we consider when we do a rate study? So we get input from ratepayers, and that's part of why we're here tonight. We get input from city staff because they know the water system. We get input from a consultant because we help a lot of cities set water rates, and we take our results to the city council. They're the ultimate deciders of what to do for the rates. We usually present various options to the city council, and they make the decision. So let's talk a little bit about how we set rates. There are typically 5 steps in a rate study. In step 1, we talk about what's important to the community. We talk about the financial goals or pricing objectives. This can include things such as conservation. How important is conservation in your community? We can talk about affordability. We can talk about different rate structures. So step 1 is simply a process by which we get to know what's important to you. In step 2, we do what's known as a financial plan. This is simply assessing how much money do you need in any particular year. In step 3, we do what's called a cost of service and rate design, and I've got a few slides on that. That's detailed calculations. And then in step 4, we prepare a report, we present to city council. And then in step 5, we notify city customers and we hold a public hearing before we can implement rates. With the next few slides has to do with the legal environment of rate making. We have to meet something called Proposition 218, which is Article 13C and 13D of the California Constitution. My next slide has to do with Prop 218. There is a pass-through provision in a section of the California Government Code, which means that the city can pass through its wholesale water purchase costs from Callegas and United. And then the last 4 pieces of legislation, I won't go into detail, but those 4 pieces of legislation from California essentially incentivize water purveyors to set rates which promote conservation. And this is Prop 218. I won't go through each one, but I will go through the first 3. An agency cannot collect revenue beyond what is necessary to provide service. Revenues from the charge cannot be used for any other purpose other than for which it was collected. The amount of the fee may not exceed the proportional cost of service for the parcel. And that's something that Raftellus does for you. We do a cost of service study to establish what it costs to serve a customer. And lastly, a few years back in 2013, San Juan Capistrano was sued by a taxpayers association, and what San Juan Capistrano lacked was a derivation or a basis for their tiered rates. And that's something that Raftellus does. We derive your rates for our clients from start to finish so that we don't get into the same situation as San Juan Capistrano. Basically, you have to show the math as to why the rates in each tier are as they are. You have to show the math. So let's talk a little bit about financial planning as part of a rate study. So the costs that are recovered in a rate study include the following that are on this slide. We have operation and maintenance costs. These include things such as chemicals, salaries, utilities, supplies. We have to recover capital costs, which was called CIP in the video. These are big projects such as repairing pipes, tanks, pumps, treatment plants, wells, and so on. We have to recover water purchase costs. As mentioned earlier, the city buys water from Callegas and United. Those costs are recovered in a rate study. We have to fund reserves. These include an operating reserve and a capital reserve. And lastly, we have to recover debt service costs. When a city issues bonds, per the bond covenants, it must set rates to, in the city's case, to recover 10% more than its operating costs in order to meet bond covenants. And the city has 4 bonds plus a Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act known as WIFIA loan. So 4 bonds and a loan that it has to set rates to make sure it can pay back those loans. And all those costs together are known, if we use this term throughout the rate study, they're known as the revenue requirement. It's the amount of revenue to recover all expenses. If revenue is not sufficient, we increase the revenue by a required percentage, and that's known as a revenue adjustment. So in future meetings, you may see something called a revenue adjustment, and that's to make sure we're recovering your costs. During a rate study, we plan for reserves. These are typical reserves at water districts or cities. We have an operating reserve. All water districts or cities have an operating reserve. All cities have a capital reserve. A capital reserve is to ensure funds are available for large construction contracts. A typical capital reserve is 1 year of your typical or average capital expenses. And then in the second column from right, there's a column that shows whether or not the city has this particular reserve. So the city has an operating reserve, it has a capital reserve, it has a debt service reserve. And so when we set rates, we got to make sure that we're fully funding those reserves. 2 other reserves that are a little bit less common are an emergency reserve. The city doesn't have an emergency reserve. And a rate stabilization reserve. An emergency reserve is for natural disasters, an earthquake or something that just we weren't planning for. And then a rate stabilization reserve can be for lost revenue during a drought or a recession, but the city at this time does not have those 2 reserves. And this slide simply repeats, it says that when we're doing a rate study, you have to consider reserves and you have to make sure you're covering your debt to meet debt covenants. We also have to plan for capital projects. This slide has quite a bit of numbers on it, but if you look at the bottom row there, you can see the city is planning to do quite a bit of capital projects in the future. 11 million in 2023, about 25 million in 24, and then even more than that in 25, 26, and 27. If the city is going to execute those projects, those costs need to be recovered as part of the rate study. And this will vary a little bit from year to year, but it's the approximate percentage of cost by type. So this, you can see in the donut here, about 40% of the city's costs have to do with simply getting water or buying water from Callegas and United. About 10% is debt service, about 36% is O&M expenses, just a little sliver there to make sure you're covering reserve, and then 12% for capital projects. And again, this is going to vary a little bit year to year, but it's a good representation of what your typical year is like. So let's talk a little bit about water cost of service. A cost of service can be a little bit detailed. I'm going to try to stay out of the weeds. But when we know the total amount of revenue to be recovered from the financial plan, we do what's known as a cost of service. And a cost of service assigns to each customer class how much they owe. So if I'm going to use an analogy, the financial plan is, if a few people are going to dinner, the financial plan decides, are we going to Ruth Chris's Steakhouse, are we going to Olive Garden, or are we going to McDonald's? We need to know roughly how much are we going to spend based on which restaurant we're going to. The cost of service analysis is we decided on a restaurant, we get the bill, and now we can do the math. Okay, Joe, you owe so much. Gina, you owe so much. That's essentially what a cost of service is. It's the detailed calculation of how much does each class owe. And so there is some guidance on doing a cost of service. Looking at the second bullet, there's guidance from the American Water Works Association. They put out something called an M1 manual called Principles of Water Rates, Fees, and Charges. We're going to be using this to do a cost of service. It's used throughout the United States to set public and privately owned utility water rates. And the rationale here is that different types of customers generate different costs because of their demand characteristics. And we want to make sure that each customer class pays its own way. That's why we do a cost of service. And when we do a cost of service, we put your costs into different cost buckets shown in this slide. And I'm not going to go through each one. I'm just going to concentrate on the one in the box that is called peaking costs. Peaking costs have to do with serving water during peak flows. And I think people usually can understand peaking costs pretty easily when it comes to electricity. If you remember last August, we all got a text in August saying our electrical system is peaking. Please, turn off this and that and do what you can do because our electrical system is stressed. It's peaking. Well, there's peaking in water too. It's just a little bit harder to understand, but instead of sending electrons through a copper wire, you're sending water molecules through a pipe. So when people come home at night, they start making dinner or take a shower, the water flowing through the system is much higher than, say, at 3 o'clock in the morning. So there are daily peaks, there are hourly peaks, there are monthly peaks. There's peaking in a water system just like an electrical system. And in order to meet those peaks, the system has to be sized to meet those peaks. So if it was just a regular day, this graph here shows a different, to make the point, shows different pipe sizes. If it was an average flow, you could just have a pipe the size of the inner circle there. But when water's really flowing, and if there's a fire, then that pipe or that tank needs to be sized to meet that peak load, and you would need a bigger pipe and a bigger tank. So you have to upsize the system to meet peak needs, and there's a cost associated with that. Bigger tanks, bigger pipes, cost more to replace, cost more to operate. So that's the definition of peaking costs. And then this chart simply shows you two different systems. One system is in blue there. The water use throughout the year doesn't go up a lot, but this red system, their water use doubles in the summer. So that system is going to need bigger tanks and bigger pipes and bigger pumps. So there would be more peaking costs in that system. And so like I said, a cost of service takes all of your costs and puts them in these different buckets here. Cost to supply water, deliver water. You see peaking there in green. The green bucket is that peaking cost that I just talked about. There's cost to maintain meters. There's cost to bill your customers. We put it into these different buckets. And then the results of a cost of service is, here's the bill, right? At the end of the day, we know single family owes 47% of the bill. Multifamily owes 13, commercial owes 21, and so on. So that's the results of a cost of service. And once we know how much each class we design rates to collect that amount of revenue. Just know that rates are not arbitrarily picked out of thin air. We have to meet Prop 218. There's a process to design and calculate rates. And we know how much each class owes from the cost of service. And when we take your fixed charges and the rates that we design, we multiply by all your customers, you end up with the cost to serve each class. So it's kind of circular, right? We design rates, and when you multiply by all the customers, we end up with your total revenue requirement. This is your current rate structure. Up at the top, you have single-family customers. So a typical home has a couple different meter sizes, and there's a fixed charge by meter size. And then there's a volumetric rate by tier, shown on the right. Tier 1 goes from 0 to 9, you pay $3.31. Tier 2 goes from 9 to 15, the rate goes up a little bit, and then Tier 3. And then similar for your other classes, you have again the fixed charge and then tiered rates. And in order to not end up like San Juan Capistrano and to make sure we meet Prop 218, to derive rates, we establish unit rates by each bucket, and we add those four together to come up with the total volumetric rate for each tier, and this provides the basis for your tiered rates. And so to summarize rate setting, many cities and water agencies perform rate studies to ensure that rates keep up with the cost to serve water. Rate studies are conducted to ensure that a utility's financial health is maintained and that Oxnard is on a course toward meeting future financial obligations. Rate setting follows guidance from the American Water Works Association, and the public is encouraged to provide input throughout this process, and that's why we have a number of meetings that Gina will talk about.
Thank you. Which one is advanced?
The big,
Okay.
dark gray.
So I just have two quick slides. Of course, tonight, our first meeting is shown here on the chart. Where am I getting feedback?
I don't know, but I'll take it.
I have a magnetic personality. I don't know.
Do you want to try using the other one?
It might be something with me. I don't know. How do I turn this one on? It's red.
Yes, that's good.
Test. That works. Thank you. So even if you're here tonight or you're watching online or going to watch the video that will be available of this meeting, there's a couple more meetings we wanted everyone to know that you could be in attendance in person or certainly watch online again. So Saturday, January 7th at 10 a.m. at the South Oxnard Rec Center. So we're offering a Saturday morning for those who may be working, and this is a time to be with families. 6 o'clock at night may not be convenient. But then we have another one on January 23rd from 6 to 8 p.m. at River Ridge Golf Course. These are also posted on the website and in the materials at the front of the room for those who are here in person. And then the schedule, I know it's hard to see the detail, but this roughly lays out the schedule for this cost of water study. And right now we're scheduled through those meetings I just mentioned, Plus, we have the city council will have a workshop in February, and then of course we'll have dates to be announced to come after February. So we hope that you stay in touch with this process. You can get the information on the website, and of course, staff wants to hear from residents. And I'm Gina. This is Steve, and just a little thing I just wanted to add that at Raftellus, we have a strategic communications team and a division. So we do work directly with the city. I'm not necessarily in charge of it. I'm not necessarily the lead, but we definitely support the city with information and messaging and the meetings. But there is a great staff here in place, so I don't want to steal their thunder. So thank you so much, and I'm going to turn it back over to Joe.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate you sharing all that excellent information. A lot of the information, as you probably gathered from the presentations, it's very specialized, it's detailed, and it's not very well known. Excuse me. So with that, I'd like to be able to take questions from the public. So if anyone here in the audience would like to ask a question, please come up to the microphone. Make sure that it's on, just adjust it, and please just ask what questions you have, and I'll either try to field that and answer it myself, or if we have all the expertise in the room, we'll utilize the expertise in that area. Apologize for the audio problems that we have. So are there any questions here in the audience? Would you like to come up and ask a question on operations, on anything related to the water system, or for the rate making process and cost of service study? Okay, can we see if we have any questions online? No questions? Well, we have information online. So if you go to our website, you can find out where we are in our rate making process and all the information. Okay. I'm sorry, maybe this is better. I don't know what happened to that one. Okay, we have all the information that we presented here tonight and on our website. So I'd like to be able to pull up a slide that goes over that information again. For the people here in attendance, we have handouts that has all the information. So you can keep up to date with things by going to our website, www.oxnardwater.org. You can also send us emails. So if you have follow-up questions, you can send us an email at water.inquiry@oxnard.org, as well as you can call us at 805-385-8390. And you can, if you come up with a question afterwards that you'd like an answer to, and the responses to these questions that we get, we'll post on our website as well. So that if you have a question, we'll either follow up with you directly and also post the information on the website so other people can see it.
That's a great FAQ.
Oh yeah, so we also have FAQs and other literature to really help share the information on what we do, so that and the reason that you're here is because you want to find out about what affects your water bill and everything, what's going on with conservation, and stay engaged as a educated consumer of anything that you're using. You want to make sure that you have all of the information possible to make the best decisions. Okay, with no questions, I'd like to just thank you all for taking the time to come here and learn about the information we present and how we operate our water system and the rate-making process, cost of service, and everything that goes into it. And please remember to use the resources that are up here, our website, our email, and our phone number for following up. So thank you very much for your time, and hope you have a pleasant evening.